Hey, there, it's me, Eden. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to my channel and visit my Patreon page for early access. Link in the comment, thanks. There was a silence as Anita continued to stare at me. I sensed that she was deciding whether to question me further on the Sylvia incident or not. Eventually she decided not to. I said we'd meet her round there when we'd finished, she went on. She's particularly keen for you to try out the dress she'd sorted out for you. I think she was a bit put out about you trying on the other one. It wasn't my fault, I exclaimed. I know. But I think it would cheer her up if you could try on her one as well. Is that all right? I shrugged, I suppose so. If you decide you'd rather have the one from the shop, we can always come back. No, I exclaimed. I'm sure Nikki's will be fine. Anita again looked at me probingly. Well, if you're sure. I'm sure, I replied. Come on then, let's go to Nikki's. We walked off down the high street, with my skirt thwopping around my legs, and the bag weighing heavy on my shoulder. We reached the end, and moved into the suburban street maze that made up the majority of our town. As we walked along, the sun came out, and I began to feel a little warm in my sweater and tights. Anita chatted away to me about nothing in particular, and I kept trying to move the bag from one shoulder to the other to stop it cutting into me. We saw a few people on their way to the shops, or on their way back, but, thankfully, none of them paid us much attention. The skirt continued to restrict my stride, but I had managed to get used to the bra, breathing more shallowly now, to stop it holding my ribcage back. The boots, too, were feeling slightly less uncomfortable now, although my toes were being pinched by the pointed front, and I still felt a little unsteady on the heel. I tried to make sense of what Sylvia had been doing back at the shop. Why had she suddenly started to molest me? All I could think of was that it was some sort of revenge for something some man had done to her in the past. She had mentioned something about rape, I remembered, not that I necessarily believed her. I looked across at Anita, who was now telling me about her French homework, and not for the first time wondered whether I had done the right thing by agreeing to enter this contest for her. I had dreamed for years of strolling around on a Saturday afternoon with her, but not with her in jeans, and me in a denim mini skirt. I shook my head in disbelief at what I had allowed to happen. It would be a long time before I could get back to normal now, but I suddenly remembered the sleepover promise. Perhaps, if I played my cards right, she would start treating me as a boy then. Are you all right, Sarah? She asked, using this name, I assumed, as there was a middle-aged couple on the opposite side of the road, but well within earshot. You're looking at me a bit oddly. I'm sorry, I said vaguely. I was listening to what you were saying. We're nearly there now, she told me, as we turned into another street of red brick houses in the maze. This is Nikki's road. We walked purposefully up the street, when suddenly a thought hit me. What if her mom and dad are in? I asked in panic. Anita looked over to me. What if they are? Well, they'll see me for a start, and they'll wonder why I'm trying on one of Nikki's dresses. Anita smiled knowingly. They won't think that's odd. They will if they realize I'm a boy, I retorted. She smiled even wider. I don't think there's much chance of that, do you? They've never thought I was a boy. Well, you're not, I responded. Well, don't get your knickers in a twist about it. Her mom and dad both work on a Saturday. I was relieved. I knew that if I was sleeping over with Anita, I would eventually have to face Anita's mom and dad, but the thought of an unexpected encounter with Nikki's parents had filled me with dread. We came to Nikki's house, which was larger than Anita's by some considerable margin. I had realized Nikki's family were quite wealthy, but I was still surprised at the relative grandeur of the place. Grandeur rather than taste, the house was still red brick, with rather garish mock Georgian columns on the doorway, and around the window frames. The front of the house was a medium-sized sweeping lawn, so we walked up the concrete path to the oak-styled front door, and Anita rang the bell. There was quite a delay before the door opened heavily, and Nikki greeted us. "Oh hi," she said, perhaps a little curtly, "come on in." She swung the door open wider, and we stepped through into a spacious hallway. "You took your time." "Yes," replied Anita. "Steve had a bit of trouble getting back into his skirt, didn't you?" I nodded, hoping that this referred to physical difficulty rather than the Sylvia incident. Nikki looked quizzically at me for a moment and then led us into their living room. It was large and dominated by its pale leather furniture. The carpet was thick and deep red, and on the walls hung a range of pastoral scene prints by famous artists. I looked around with some interest and suddenly jolted. In one of the chairs sat a girl of about 12 or 13. It was Nikki's other sister, Tanya. "Hi," she said, sitting cat-like and smiling at me. "You look nice." "I told you he did," declared Nikki. "He looks good with makeup on, doesn't he?" Tanya nodded, her thick fair hair bobbing with her. She had had a crush on me earlier that year, which had become a little awkward. Nikki, Anita and I always traveled home from school together, and often, although 2 years younger, Tanya would join us and stifle my attempts to get Anita to go out with me by staring longingly at me. She had grown a bit colder over the past couple of months though. "And he looks good in a skirt," Tanya added, looking down at my legs. This was awful. I had been hung up about Nikki's parents seeing me, but now both her sisters had seen me as a girl. My face obviously betrayed my feelings of glumness. "Don't look so worried, Steve," Nikki told me. "Tanya won't be telling anyone you've been wandering around uptown dressed in a skirt." Tanya continued smiling and shook her head. "No," she said, "I've been sworn to secrecy. As long as I get to see you in my bridesmaid's dress, that is." "Your bridesmaid's dress?" I found myself saying. I thought Nikki had sorted me something out. "I have," Nikki explained. "Last year the 3 of us were bridesmaids at our cousin's wedding. I was going to get you to try on my dress, but as you're so," she paused for a moment. "Well, dainty, I think you'd be better off with Tanya's. You'd be swamped in mine." Tanya nodded at this, without taking her eyes off of me. "It's okay, with me." This was getting worse by the minute. Not only was I going to have to wear another dress, but one belonging to a girl 2 years younger than me, because I was so small. Tanya, like her sisters, was a well-built girl, so in some ways I felt less tiny than I might have done, but something still told me that I should take a larger dress size than a 13-year-old. Suddenly another thought hit me. "A bridesmaid's dress?" I exclaimed. "I thought I was supposed to having something, what did you call it, formal?" "You are," said Nikki, with patience. "It's all right, it's quite a formal-looking dress, even though it was for a wedding. Hang on, I'll go and get it so you can have a look." "I'm looking forward to seeing you in it, Steve," Tanya told me, still fixing me with her eyes and smiling. We all hated wearing them, they were so restrictive when we wanted to party. "Yes, they can be, can't they?" agreed Anita. "I was a bridesmaid once, and I hated it too." She sat down on the leather sofa and picked up a magazine from the coffee table. Nikki had disappeared into the depths of the house. I felt more than a little uncomfortable standing there, with Tanya smiling benignly at me, and, more importantly, Anita seemingly ignoring me. I had been the center of her attention for a good few hours now, and its sudden withdrawal as she flipped the pages of the magazine was poignant. I placed my bag down on the arm of one of the chairs, as I had seen Anita do. I was getting too good at this being a girl lark. Nikki walked back into the room carrying a huge plastic case. Because of its length, she was holding it out in front of her at about head height. This is heavy, she gasped, throwing it onto a second sofa. Tanya stood up and walked languidly over to her sister. Anita put down her magazine and stood also, gathering around the gray plastic bag, now slouched across the pale leather. Well, let's see then, Anita said, eagerly. Nikki lifted the bag again and undid the zip on its front. Inside was something peach-colored made of satin. I grimaced to myself, imagining what moth of horror would emerge from this chrysalis. Nikki pulled the dress free. I was, in some ways, relieved. It was relatively plain, with straps coming up from the waist to form the shoulders and cover the bust. It was certainly satin, but not shiny like the one in the shop. Somehow I had in mind something covered in frills and lace, at least I had got away with that. Oh, it's lovely, cooed Anita, looking at it as Nikki pulled it free. And such a nice color too. Yes, agreed Nikki. All three girls had gathered around the dress, and were for the time, ignoring me. I'd forgotten what it looked like really, Tanya put in. But I suppose it's not as bad as I remembered it. Well, they're always better to look at than to wear, Anita observed. She touched the skirt of the thing, which I noticed was floor length. It's lined. Yeah, said Nikki. At least we won't have him making too much fuss about petticoats again. No, Anita agreed, remembering how I had tried to not wear the slip I now had on. We had them all cleaned after the wedding, Nikki went on, still holding the dress. We always said they might come in handy for something, so I suppose we were right. Yes, agreed Anita, fondling the fabric as it tumbled from its hanger. The one I had was pink, with all sorts of ruffles around the neckline. Oh yuck, exclaimed Tanya. I hate stuff like that. Me too, said Anita. Still, it might have looked sweet on Sarah. The girls turned to me and laughed. Sarah? Asked Tanya. Yeah, that's his new name, explained Nikki. He had to have one for the contest, and he's been insisting we call him it now, so he can get used to it. No, I haven't. I gasped. You did. Nikki accused. You said we had to make sure nobody realized you were a boy when we were out. That's right, agreed Anita. Oh well, I'm sorry if I called you Steve when you came in, Tanya told me, grinning broadly. I'll try and remember that you're now called Sarah. They tittered for a moment, and then Nikki said in a businesslike manner. Well, we might as well see what he looks like in this. Yes, said both Tanya and Anita enthusiastically. Help him get some of that stuff off, will you? Nikki asked, still holding the dress, then I'll help him put this on. Anita seemed happy enough to comply, and moved across the room towards me. Come on, Steve, I'll help you, she said. Steve, objected Tanya, just behind her. I thought we were calling him Sarah. Oh yes, declared Anita. I'm so sorry, Sarah, how thoughtless of me. It's all right when there's no one else about. I mumbled, but they showed no sign of hearing me. Well then, Sarah, we'd best get your boots off first, Anita told me. I'll do it myself, I said, rather petulantly. She's getting very independent, isn't she? Anita retorted, which amused all three of them. I sat down in one of the chairs in a hurry, and immediately wished I hadn't. Oh God, look, exclaimed Tanya. I can see his knickers, and they're girls' ones. I felt so ashamed. Somehow I had allowed Nikki and Anita to talk me into wearing girls' knickers, and now this 13-year-old who once had fancied me had seen them. Of course, declared Anita, obviously pleased with herself. He wouldn't be entirely dressed as a girl unless he had girls' knickers on, would he? I suppose not, said Tanya, thinking about this. I'm not sure I'd let a boy wear a pair of mine though. It would be a bit odd wearing them yourself afterwards, wouldn't it? Oh, it's all right. I've finished with those ones anyway, they're his now. Anita exclaimed, smiling. I gave her a puzzled look, but she took no notice. I managed to shuffle myself around a bit so my knickers were no longer on show, and, being desperately careful to hold my knees together, I undid the zips on the boots and stepped out of them. That's the idea, Anita encouraged. Now for the skirt. I stood up again, and undid the jeans front of the skirt, then pulled it down and stepped out of it. Blimey, said Tanya, with genuine surprise in her voice, you got him to wear a slip. Yes, Anita replied. It makes his skirt hang a lot better. I bet it does. And he looks really sweet in it, Tanya went on, especially the little scalloped hem with flowers on. Nice and sweet. We thought so, said Anita, proudly. Do you think the other boys in the contest will be wearing girls' underwear as well? Tanya asked. Well, I hope not, said Anita. The rules say that all their clothing has to be suitably ladylike and feminine. If any boys wear their own knickers, we're hoping they get thrown out. Please subscribe for the next part. And visit my Patreon page for early access.